Right. We're live.
Oh, good.
I'll just wait for a couple of seconds for everyone to join and then we'll begin.
Sure. Yeah. I only hope we don't have a power outage. That's my only fear in Goa. And I've got a backup system here which I'll turn on, but it may not be as good. It may be better actually than what we have. But...
Right. It's been raining in Bangalore as well, so this can happen. I'm fearing it happening here.
Well, that's the scary part, because then with that, the sort of Wi-Fi disappears and all kinds of things go wrong. So
right.
I tried to kind of build in some sort of backup to it. I've got my hotspot ready and waiting. I've got a power backup system in place to kind of at least give me light and sufficient light for a camera to pick up. But let's hope we get through this without any hiccups.
Absolutely, sir. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Natasha Doshi. Welcome to another episode of Sapna Rise. Today we're on season 4, episode 3, and I have two really enigmatic personalities with me. It's an honor to be sharing my screen with them today. We have none other than Peter Mukerjea. I can proudly say that he's the face of Indian television, and he's changed the whole course of how we look at television today. And I have Nijesh Shah, our very own director, with us. I welcome you both to today's session.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
Thanks, Natasha, and equally excited to have Peter with us. In fact, when I went through your book, Starstruck, and it really gave me the resonance of how starlit your entire life is, because you've traveled so many countries, you have been part of so many corporates. It must be a pure journey, and that one could dream of. So, before, without much ado, if you could tell us what's in the book, and why did you think of writing a book? And there's so much in the book where we're going to discuss further. But just to begin, Peter Mukerjea's Starstruck: Confessions of a TV Executive. Tell us, Peter, more about the book.
Well, Nijesh, I'll tell you, it's an interesting question. What's in the book is I reckon, about 300 odd pages of memories, of fond memories. It's taken about 9 years for me in the making. I started it some while ago and then, aborted the plan. I'd written half of it, I think, or bulk of it. And then I decided I wasn't going to do it at all. Then I changed my mind, and then I decided, we'll go through with it, and made a few changes. It's gone through a few hoops in terms of, different renditions. But what's in it is, well, first of all, I think people have got to buy the book and read it, because I don't really want to steal the book's thunder, so to speak. But it's got fun insights. It's got some sort of business-oriented lessons in there. Things to do, things not to do. I believe there are learnings for, young people who are getting into industry, not just media, but any kind of industry, when they're transitioning from being, students to, taking on a career. I think they'll find, a fair amount in there that will be off the grid as far as, what they would have learned at business school and stuff. Because, a lot of those are experiences that you kind of have as you roll up your sleeves and get stuck into either a particular job or into a career. Oddly enough, there's a few stories about Bangalore, your city. And, I have very fond memories of that city indeed. And, in the early days of Star TV, we did a fair amount of work there, and paid us some good dividends. There's, I think, people that have commented on my book in the recent past have said to me that it's a very conversational style of having written it, and so for them, they found it really easy to read, and many ways they couldn't put it down. So they kind of went through it in a weekend. It didn't take them, they didn't have to really labor over it, which I think is probably what the intention was. And I'm glad it's, happened that way.
In fact, you speak of the intention, which is right, because when personally I went through the book, I felt that it's so much of learning for anybody, be it a business graduate, be it a startup company, be it an enterprise, because it doesn't talk about you alone as a person. It talks about building a company. It talks about meeting people. It talks about creating that change. And of course, like Natasha said, if not for you, who would have seen Kyuki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi, which is probably today the longest running serial, or was the longest running serial in the world. So I think fantastic in terms of a life that you have lived, and the kind of impact you've been able to provide, and which is there in the book. And I totally agree with the comments that you've been getting of the book.
Yeah, very kind. Again, I see it as it was an interesting journey that I've tried to kind of map without getting into great detail on everything. I've picked up some sort of incidents which have been particularly interesting to me, and I thought I'd share some of those with readers. There are instances where there've been fun instances, there've been scary instances for me. Making presentations to somebody like a Rupert Murdoch for the first time, those sort of things that perhaps a lot of people may not know how to deal with those kind of situations. And to be honest with you, neither did I, but I had to face them, and I thought I ought to share them with with readers. And why I wrote the book is an interesting question. Again, I think it's really to do with, I think television is so omnipresent in our lives, right? The Star TV network, without any doubt, as far as I'm concerned, is certainly was and still is probably the biggest and the best in the country. I'm sure other people would love to debate that with me, but yeah, fair enough, bring it on. But I think the fact that so much of what it took to make it what it is would never ever have seen the light of day had it not been put on paper, and it is now. And of course there is lots that is not written in there, but that you've got to read between the lines to see the make sense out of it and the nuances. So there is a fair bit in there which is perhaps in another book.
Peter, from being an account director at DDB to actually heading advertising sales at Star TV and then eventually becoming the CEO, it's been so fascinating reading it. I can't resist myself. I really want to ask you how your journey has been.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, DDB was a great place to work in advertising. And I've talked about it a little bit prior to DDB when I was at Ogilvy in London as well as in Delhi. And I moved to Hong Kong and joined DDB. And I had two clients to work on. One was Star, which really wasn't the client at all at that point because they hadn't launched. And the other one was Audi Volkswagen. And both of them are absolutely fantastic brands, quite different. Audi Volkswagen has been around for years and years with some spectacular advertising over time. Very memorable stuff. And then there was Star, which was, a kind of a dream of a Chinese guy called Richard Lee, who literally went out and paid for a satellite. He had a rich dad, which helps sometimes. And and so he paid for a satellite that was lost up in space, and had been brought down, and then they fixed it up and then relaunched it, and that became AsiaSat. And so that the footprint of that satellite was kind of massive. It was all the way from, I think, Egypt all the way across to Taiwan.
Wow.
And which doesn't happen anymore. I mean, people carve it up into smaller chunks now. But the journey that I went through when I was in Hong Kong, which is of course, an incredibly seductive city, probably one of the best cities I've ever lived in, and moving from there to to Mumbai, which I'd never worked in before. So I was terrified in many ways. I'm going to come to a city where really I don't speak Marathi, which is a bit sad. I do now, having lived there for 20 years almost. I know all the right words and the wrong words. So, so the move from Hong Kong to Bombay or Mumbai was actually quite scary for me, but it worked out all right. That entire process of starting something from, we had an office, well, probably smaller than your wardrobe, I should think, Natasha. But, it was a tiny little room with, a kettle and a Xerox machine, and or maybe we didn't even have a Xerox machine at the time. It was something we all went out to get copies made. But it was a tiny, pokey little thing. It was literally a broom cupboard, And we had one desk, and we had 3 guys sharing it, and we'd be kind of, somebody went out for a meeting. It was really good news because we could use the desk, that kind of thing. So it's, we got into a company that was literally a startup, and today people talk about startups, and quite honestly, Star was very much that at that point. It was just, it was unbelievable. And many people wouldn't know that. When you watch television screen today and you see, all these hundreds of channels that say Star TV network and so on, you think, my goodness, this is just some gigantic company. Well, it is now, but, it started off from a broom cupboard pretty much. So I think that entire journey, or large chunks of it, is what I've tried to kind of put together in the, in these 200 or 300 pages.
So I must say it's been so inspiring, because every time you've talked about your journey, be it the hardships, be it the laurels, I think I can see so many awards behind you. So from the broom cover to all the awards behind you.
Well, I'm very fortunate to have received the awards and held on to them, because actually they belong to a lot of other people, as well. I was, privileged enough to go and receive them, and which is why I've stuck them on my wall now. But in many ways, they really are a kind of deliverance of several people. All the people that worked in the company at the time. Everybody from the doorman upwards. To be honest with you, they were all very much part and parcel of the, of a work culture that we tried to create. And that I think has paid off, or did pay off for us at that time. And we transitioned from from an English language service to a Hindi service, which again is not something that many people can claim that they have achieved or have done. I think we did that, with a fair degree of aplomb and a fair degree of success. Of course, we had lots of support from our leaders in Hong Kong, in New York, that enabled it all to come together. But again, I was very fortunate, so these awards that you see behind me are really a collective effort of everybody.
In fact, just to add to what you said, that being a startup kind of an environment that you set up, how difficult was it for you personally to set Star TV, which was predominantly an English speaking channel, in the late 90s, to get it to India, and then dominate the entire Hindi speaking market? So how difficult or easy was it for you, for the team at Star, to convert this English speaking channel of Star to the household name in India, for all the daily soaps?
Well, I'd love to say it was really hard, and we kind of worked like coal miners, and worked sort of day and night, at the coal face to get it done. But I got to also tell you that we had a very interesting approach. We thought, look, if it works, it's great. If it doesn't work, well, we'll cross that bridge later, right? So we put our heart and souls into something. And I've said in the book, actually, I've quoted a favorite movie of mine, which is Johnny English, which is, he knew nothing, he fears nothing. And that's pretty much what we went with. So having said that, yes, of course, we had thought it through as much as we could. There's no guarantee to success in these things. So, you work at it, and you hope to God that it works. If it doesn't work, you try and have a backup plan. But I always believe that if you have a backup plan, then your first plan isn't really up to much. So I think we didn't have a backup plan either. So when somebody suggested to us many years ago that we ought to go off into doing Hindi, everybody laughed, and including myself, to be honest with you. And we tried, and my predecessor, there was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Basu, who is quite widely written about in the book, and I have a huge amount of respect for him in the sense that he was the one that actually bit the bullet of taking Star from English to Hindi. So he was troubled with all the experimentation that had to be done. So we dubbed programs like Baywatch and The Bold and the Beautiful, and goodness knows you'll remember some of them, Santa Barbara and stuff like that. And quite honestly, Star at that point was the laughing stock of the market, because those people that were watching us, and because it was an English language service, found it abhorrent. They thought, oh my goodness, what are these guys doing? They don't know they don't know their backsides from their elbow, and no, it's complete nonsense. And the people that were wanting to watch something in Hindi found it equally abhorrent, because they couldn't figure out what were these people in different parts of the world trying to speak in dubbed Hindi for, and it was confusing. So but it was a piece of experimentation that we all had to go through, and if we hadn't done that, it wouldn't have fallen onto me to to move it forward. And so when I was given that responsibility, then that's when things became 100% Hindi language. And of course, we had to then part ways with our partner at that time, which was Z, because there were contractual issues with regard to they were doing Hindi, we were doing English, and could we both do both languages? Well, we couldn't, so long as we were partners. So as long as we weren't partners, which is why we had to break away, we were able to both then do whatever we wanted. And we wanted to do Hindi, because if we wanted to be big as far as India was concerned, then it was not going to be possible just to remain in English. Now we had to be in Hindi as well. And now, as we know, Star has gone into sort of numerous languages. So it's not just English and Hindi, but it's into Kannada and Tamil and Bengali, etc., etc. So, and I think that's just a process of evolution. But the word that we used a lot those days was localization, right? So bear in mind, we were a foreign company, right? We're a foreign company working in in India, broadcasting in English, which was only a tiny slice of the overall population, and we were transitioning into Hindi, and Hindi was dominated by, of course, Doordarshan as well as Z, and of course later on Sony. And so we were a struggler. It was a three horse race, and we were number 3. And our position of number 3 was kind of at least 5 miles behind number 2. So we had a fair amount of work to do. We had a lot of catching up to do. And, I believe that all the people that worked there did a huge amount of work. We had actually parked our lives, personal lives, to one side. And we kind of just dedicated everything to our workplace. So I remember, we were hiring, when I was hiring people, I tried to make sure that we hired only single people. So they didn't, they weren't married, and they weren't, committed in other ways, so that they didn't have to rush home and kind of look after other details, and so they could just dedicate their lives to what we wanted to achieve. So little things like that. I think a lot of that's in the book, and I'd really urge some of your people watching and people that visit your store to pick up the book and take it home and read it over a weekend.
No, I'm sure, because of what you just said, how big Star has become today, that people buy satellite TV because they want to watch Star TV. And it became synonymous to a lot of daily soaps, and a lot of the family crowd, and the women in the house. They wanted to switch on the TV only because of Star, and which was the case, not because we are talking. And that's what even the stats say. So Star did definitely dominate and it became number one from the three that you mentioned. So yes, it was a job well done.
Well, thank you. I think, getting to number one wasn't easy, I got to say. We had to kind of, obviously invest a fair amount of money, which was thanks to our leader, Rupert, having a great deal of faith in the team that was running Star in India. And he kind of agreed to, make those investments with the hope that it kind of worked. And, we were a company that had been around for 10 years before we made a dime. And I think that's quite a unique thing for any business enterprise, to invest in a business for over a decade before you see any positive return. Most people will back away from it after a year, maybe two, maybe three, and they're outside. And I say, this isn't working, let's shut it. Or let's kind of redo something. But these guys had a lot of faith, and they kind of, they could see the potential of the marketplace. They could see that the team was committed, and it thankfully worked. So I think getting from number 3 to number 1 was, of course, a stroke of luck, much more than a stroke of genius, and I think it was something that we were very happy that it worked out, and made a lot of people very happy as well, including viewers. Our mission at that point was never to really, of course, profit was there. It was at the kind of end of the rainbow. But, our mission and aim as a business was really not to just look at profit. I think it was more to providing, a Mr. and Mrs. Khanna or a Mr. and Mrs. Rao or whoever, a kind of warm and fuzzy feeling when they're sitting watching television at home. Switching on the TV, put your feet up, curl your toes, and enjoy the show, right? And at the end of it, if that's what you can deliver, then I think you're making a difference in their lives. And that was our intent. And thankfully, we had some, we had competition, which, at that point wasn't doing a great job. There were, on Doordarshan, for instance, there were, programs that would start late. They would say 7 o'clock, but then start at 7:30. Sometimes the program wouldn't happen at all, and there would be a sign that comes up on the screen saying, sorry for the interruption. I think things like that, where you take your viewer for granted. And one of the things we did not do was take our viewers for granted. And I think that made a big difference, because for us it was viewer first, advertiser second. And I think a lot of the other, our competitors, I don't know whether they had the same philosophy. For them, I think it was advertiser first. Let's get those guys in. Let's, get some money.
Let's make some money first.
Yeah, and for us, I think it was, you turn it on its head and say, look, it was actually the consumer who we really need to be, make ourselves, be loyal to, and they should be loyal to us because they're getting good quality and they feel warm and fuzzy when they're watching. So there was a very clear intent in what we set out to do. It wasn't just profit. And I think, again, from my point of view, that was a good thing, because it kind of enabled me to be able to kind of, get together a team of people that were equally passionate, and we all rolled up our sleeves. We got to work as early as possible, went home as late as possible, and had a great time. So it was a work hard and play harder kind of philosophy, in many ways.
Sir, actually, there's a line from the book which I found so interesting, where Rupert asks you, how many villages are there in India? And at the end of the conversation, he kind of wanted to spread Star Network to every nook and corner of India. And that's actually kind of translated today. So, it's actually his dream come true, and all of you have just aided to it. Tell us how your relationship with Rupert was. How was it working with him?
Well, I didn't quite honestly have a great relationship, in the sense that the amount of time I spent with him was actually quite little, but the little time that I did spend was incredibly insightful. I was able to kind of learn an awful lot. He's a man who has you know, he is incredibly intuitive. He's a, and I mean this nicely, he's a gambler, out and out gambler, and a risk taker, therefore. And so when you're working with somebody like that, he will go with his gut feel and his intuition more than sitting and watching presentations with a huge amount of data thrown into it. And he will cut to the chase very quickly. And really, the question that he asked me when I was making that first presentation to him about, so how many villages are there in India? And I had no clue. I promise you, I had planned a presentation which was to do with advertising and the sort of social, marketplace, the economic marketplace that India presented, and all of that. And, who were the big advertisers and how much money they were spending and how much money we thought we could get from them. And, actually boring details like that, right? But his question to me kind of floored me, and I had really no answer. So I took a wild guess, and I said, "Look, I think about 500,000, maybe 600,000." And thankfully it was pretty close to the truth. But and so when he kind of responded to that by saying, another googly question, which is, so what will it take to get television into each village? And really, for me, who was a marketing guy and that ex-advertising person, I had no idea what it takes to get, television to every village. But if you think about it at a practical level, you say, well, look, most of the villages probably didn't have electricity at that point. And so, that was the first barrier. Then there was an affordability of having, enough money to be able to buy a television set and stuff like that. So then I had to put that to him, and he said, okay, so what would it cost? And we broke it down into, granular detail and say, okay, so what will it cost? What's the television cost? What will it cost to get a generator into each village, right? So when you aggregate all of those little details and you say, okay, so the actual cost of that will be X, then you multiply that times 500,000 and you say, well, okay, that's a lot of money, but that's still a big marketplace. And so from his point of view, that marketplace was really what was exciting. And as I said in my book, India was never part of Rupert Murdoch's plan. And that's the irony of this entire, I say story, is that, it was always China. And that's what he invested in Star for. It was not for India, but for China. And I think India came to him by default. So when we started to get advertising revenue, we started to make some money, we started to get traction by the consumer, I think everybody's eyes opened and their eyes lit up and they suddenly arrived in droves into India and said, okay, now how can we, really make this into a proper business, right? And that's when we moved out of the broom cupboard and we moved into a proper office, right? And so I think, those are some of the tales that are in this book. So as I say, I don't want to kind of, steal anybody's excitement from, reading the book by telling you everything, but I think you ought to really have a glimpse at it.
Absolutely. To everyone who's tuned in, I must recommend this book. You can head to any of your Sapna Book House outlets that's close by and pick up the book. In case you're not able to step out, please visit our online website. You can head to sapnaonline.com and order your book immediately. I personally recommend it because it's been so interesting to read about how the entire Star Network panned out, Peter Sir's journey.
In fact, one thing I'm very curious to know, Peter, is what, according to you, was the peak of Star? Was it your relationship with Balaji, or was it, the KBC that you started off? And what, according to you, was the peak of Star, and what really took off and made Star the star that we are seeing today?
I would love to say that it was KBC. Of course, it was from a programming point of view. But for me, it was the fact that we had a guy who, was running the company at the time out of Hong Kong, who was a young kid, And he, had a lot of faith in us. And his name was James Murdoch. Now, I think to this day that if it was not for him being at the helm, I think it would have been a totally different exercise for me and for everybody else. And we may not have reached, and achieved what we did. And I'm not trying to blow his balloon right now by saying this, but that's the actual fact. I'm hardly in touch with him now, as a matter of fact, but the fact is that he really was instrumental in making that business what it is, because he was his father's son. And, I think there is a great merit in being able to pick up the phone and have a chat with dad about something, and then you have a casual conversation about something else, and it leads to what you actually wanted to talk about, rather than having a senior executive pick up the phone and talk to Rupert and, and discuss something which was, related to a business decision. So there you had, sometimes you have hierarchies in an organization, you have, layers of management and so on, and not every executive could pick up the phone and talk to Rupert, quite as easily as perhaps James could. And I think that, actually made a mountain of a difference without any doubt. So for me, that was the peak of my career at Star, when I was working closely with him, and we were able to take decisions rapidly. We were able to take decisions quickly. Not all of them were right. Some of them, we got it wrong occasionally, quite often. But that's fine. That's what happens when you're kind of running along. But I think, and when he left and he went off to other parts of the business elsewhere in the world, I think the momentum suddenly came off. And I think people, as they say, pedal to the metal. I think, the pedal to the metal disappeared. And it became much slower. It became bureaucratic. It became slow. It became sluggish. And I think we lost a huge amount of opportunity there. And in answer to your question, I think for me that was the peak. Of course, there were smaller peaks in the range of peaks, if you like. Of course, KBC was very much one of them. The transition, moving from NDTV to Star News was a high point in my life. It was an exciting time starting a news channel, fraught with danger, fraught with lots of landmines. You got to tread really carefully. All of those things. But I think from a career point of view, you don't want a dull life. You want an exciting life. You want to be able to stay awake at night and wonder what's going to happen tomorrow. Is it going to be exciting? Is it going to be who are you going to be battling with? And I think somebody said, I can't remember, you're not judged by the quality of your friends. You're actually judged by the quality of your enemies. And so, if that being the case, I think we had a fair number of them. Because we were doing well, we were making progress, we were making a difference, and in that process, we were making enemies. Of course, we were making friends as well, and we were making enemies. And when you think about it in retrospect, and this is what this book is about, quite honestly, you realize that whilst you get through your career, you're going to make friends, but you're also going to run into a lot of people who are, not going to be friends. So how do you deal with those? And, what do you do about it? So I think, answer to your question, Rajesh, I think high points, yes, James, very much. And then sub-high points were, programming, moving from English to Hindi, Star News, launching of Channel V, really kicking off the music industry, I think, in many ways, because MTV, took off, in a cloud of dust and said, look, we don't want to be doing anything in India if you're going to do Hindi music. And, for us, localization was the kind of mantra. And, the music industry grew out of that, and BPL, one of the, wonderful clients we had out of Bangalore at that time, were supporters of, one of our first, Hindi program ventures in music, and made a huge difference to, to the music industry. So what we see of, music pop today really has a lot to do with what happened, with the emergence of brands like Channel V, and I'm really glad I was part of that.
No, in fact, the way to read your book, Peter, is not just from the protagonist being you, but for anybody who's starting up or who is in business or probably just going through things in life. I think the way to read your book is about gaining that life skills, because your book has so much interaction, if I can put it that way, from people to things. And like you rightly said, it's not just a flat line. It's a series of ups and downs. And I think a lot of people can learn a lot of things from your book. So I definitely recommend all the viewers who are listening to Peter to get the book and delve into his life and understand what he started and how he grew it and made it the number one. And it's a wonderful read, and you speak about it. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I've tried to keep it fairly lucid in the way it's been written. I touched on that earlier in saying, it's a kind of conversational style of writing, and that's intentional because I really didn't want it to be a book. There's enough books being written on media, and very good ones, which people use as data points and stuff like that. And I've tried to kind of steer away from throwing in too much data into the book. It's more anecdotal, and but you quite often have to read a paragraph or a chapter more than once to really get the deeper meaning inside it. And if you read it as a very casual read, that's fine. It'll make you chuckle a little bit. It'll open your eyes in wonderment, perhaps. But I think if you will come unstuck in places. And I remember I had some very interesting conversations with Westland, the publishers, and Deepthi, who was the editor, and bless her, she worked so hard in trying to get it, to what it is today. Because I'd written it, and it was, even as you can imagine, it was even more conversational than it actually is right now. So it was jumping about from one incident to another, and there were very few points of connect. So she had to kind of I think put her thinking cap on several times to really draw in a lot of the kind of the connection points to be able to kind of make it string together for the reader. It's different for somebody writing it, and I think it's quite different for somebody reading it. So somebody reading it might have to read some chapters over and over again to kind of take out the kind of deeper meaning in it. And there's some interesting ones. I mean, there's one chapter, I can't remember which one it is. I've got my book here, actually. I should be able to refer to it. But it's what I love. I mean, I love all the quotes in there, quite honestly, and they've been handpicked for for very, very good reason. But winners have parties, losers have meetings, right?
Wow.
And I think that is sort of sums up in many ways what our work philosophy was. And many of the things that we did at that time perhaps may not fly today, because today the world is a different place, and one has to be much more circumspect about lots of things, and how one operates, and how one runs a business, and what you can expect your colleagues to kind of people are very time conscious. They want the work-life balance to be balanced up quite nicely, and expecting them to be working 18 hours a day is quite hard. But I think one of the ways we managed to kind of deal with that was possibly to do with how when we hired them, we made sure that we hired people who had the right mindset, and also I believe compensated people well. And I think compensation was a key part of our kind of existence. I think I wanted to be an employer of choice, right? So I wanted people to work there not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they wanted to come and work in that company. And I remember having conversations with people that I'd interviewed, and they would say to me, they'd call me and we offered them a job, and they would say, "Would you mind, sir, speaking to my mom and dad? Because they don't want me to come and work in television. They want me to go work in a
Okay.
bank." Right? And I would have, I had great difficulty kind of dealing with that, because I want, at the end of the day, you want to hire somebody, it's up to them whether they want to come and work for you. If you'd like to hire them, then it's great. But if they have a family issue and the parents, who obviously invested a lot of time and money and effort in bringing up their child, wants their child to go off in a particular direction, but the child wants to go and do something else, then, who am I really to step into that debate, right? I mean, if somebody wants to be a lion tamer in a circus, then how would I, interfere with that? So, but occasionally I did have those conversations, and I had to kind of have a conversation with, I remember one incident where this guy said, "Look, will you speak to my parents?" He said, actually, then he changed it. He said, "Don't speak to my dad, speak to my mom, because she'll convince my dad."
Okay.
So I said, "Okay." So I then spoke to his mother and explained to her, "Look, it's what he wants to do. This is really where his passion lies. He's going to be really good at it, and so on." And I won't give you a name right now, but he's running one of the largest media companies in the country today.
Wow.
And I was fortunate that a lot of these people that joined Star and joined the team that I was running at that time are running successful businesses and are doing really well for themselves. So I take a great deal of pride, and they're all great friends now. So we catch up every now and again and share some jokes and share some walk down memory lane and stuff. Those are guys who've actually been very 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 helpful in kind of sending me good comments about the content of the book as well.
Peter, so throughout the book, I've kind of come across instances where you've talked about the work atmosphere at Star TV and how different it's been. You started a very different work culture back then. So, how did you actually create something so different back then?
Well, I was very lucky, because I think I studied abroad and I worked abroad for a long time before I arrived in India. I was accustomed to a certain kind of work culture where, and at the time, we set some basic ground rules, in that we said, "Look, you can't call anybody Mister. You have to call them by their first name." Right? So we were on a first name base. People would call me Peter. I would call somebody whatever, Sonia or whatever their name was, and that's how we functioned. And that was really quite, it helped people gain a tremendous amount of feeling of access, feeling of, comfort in their own confidence levels.
Okay.
So I would make it a point that, look, don't attend a meeting if you didn't have anything to contribute, right? Because there's no point just sitting and attending a meeting and not saying anything, right? So you've got to say something. It doesn't matter who's in the room, and if you feel that you have a point of view, then please share it, because that's the best way forward. It may not necessarily work for several reasons, but don't be shy of sharing your thoughts. First name terms, being open. I think, as I said earlier, compensating people well, encouraging them to spend time with clients. I would encourage our salespeople and our executives to kind of take people out for breakfast or lunch or dinner or whatever, and spend time with them for two reasons. One is you get to know them, you get to know what's in their mind, what are their concerns, what are their fears, what are their soft spots. And at the same time, if you spend time with them, it means your competition isn't spending time with them, right? So if the media buyer was being being entertained by one of our executives and going out for lunch or for dinner, then it clearly meant that media executive was spending time talking about our business, and the guys from Z or from Sony or wherever were not able to kind of reach that guy, because that person, because they were blocked, right? So I think simple things like that were things that we were able to do and enable us to kind of lead the way. And at that time, I think a lot of the other companies in the business were not thinking like that. They would all be, very deferential to their bosses. There would be Mr. this and Mr. that and Mrs. this and yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And that's fine. I think that's it's a good thing. But you do that, not out of compulsion. You do that out of choice, right? So if I'm in a restaurant, I'll call the waiter and say, "Excuse me, sir, can I please have a bottle of water?" Right? So it's the same thing. To do that, to have basic courtesies in what you do. And I think those are just the most basic things. And I was trained like that. So I was able to kind of implement it. And that helped everybody I think in the company. I mean, I never had a different way of talking to, let's say, the doorman, right, in the company as I did to any other executive. I mean, very often that's, spend 2 minutes finding out how things are. Is he all right? Is his family okay? And blah, blah, blah. And, I think that's just a human thing to do. And people felt happy. They loved coming to work, and they would be so delighted that somebody, senior, came and talked to them and spent time with them, spent 2 minutes talking to them. And they'd go home and say, today boss came and said hi to me. And I think it's so important. No, so many companies just don't do that. Which is
like you rightly said, the kind of atmosphere that you created at Star, ensured that Star had the right resources to bring itself on top. And most of us, we spend more time at work than at home. So the home, the environment at work is very important, and that's what you've been able to create. So, speaking of media, I think, Natasha, we have a couple of more questions to go, or do we have the last question?
I think, Nijesh, this would be the last question.
Okay, so I'll just touch upon a little bit on the media side, because you've had extensive experience on handling media and being part of the media houses. What do you say of the media today? Today we see media very sensational versus the traditional and authentic media back in the early days. So do you see this shift good for people, for masses, or do you think it's over the top and it has to be controlled? What are your views on the media today?
Look, when you say media, I get a sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're talking about news, because entertainment is
Yes, journalism and news, both.
Yeah. So
Journalism and news, yeah.
so it's a kind of one genre of the overall media spectrum, if you like, and so within that, I would say that on the news channel, I've stopped watching news channels for a variety of reasons, but the general sense that I have is that the way news channels are evaluated is something that needs to be revisited. The concept of having ratings driving the success or failure of a news business is, I think, incorrect. And I think it really needs to be altered to be qualitative rather than quantitative. I've been saying this for some time because I genuinely believe that I think the time has come for news channels to be evaluated on the basis of being biased or unbiased, in depth. Are they accurate, and so on. And if you were to compare, a news channel in India with a news channel that is produced overseas, I think you'll see the difference instantly. I think, but it's really the way that the channels are evaluated. And I don't blame the news channels themselves, because that's the currency that they have to live with. So it's the currency that needs to be changed first, and then the news channel will adapt accordingly. And if I was running a news channel, I'd probably be saying the same thing right now. Say, look, it's all very well for me to be saying this. I'm sitting on, not being involved in any of these businesses right now, to be saying, look, this is the way to do it. But at the end of the day, they've got to look at their shareholders. They've got to look at their bottom line. And if the way that they are evaluated is the basis of rating points, then they're going to go chase after stories that are going to give them eyeballs. But in reality, it's not about the eyeballs, it's the quality of the eyeballs and not just the volume, right? So and perhaps the qualitative research that I'm referring to ought to be done. It can't be done every week. It's impossible. So you do it maybe twice a year, and the bit like the ABC of print, right, where you get circulation numbers that come out once a year. So you base a lot of your revenues and so on what those numbers stack up to be. So here in the context of electronic media, I would say there ought to be a different way of measuring the success or failure of news channels. And I think with that, everything else will alter. So it's, that is one part. I think the second part is that from a news channel's point of view, they really ought to hire, I think, better quality of people. I think the quality of people going into the news business, I think, is has room for improvement. A bit like my school report card, I would say could do better. So, I think that's a par for the course for all of them, and I think it's something that they need to invest in, getting brighter people, getting and then training them, because I don't think there's enough investment going into training these people and saying, look, this is how we want you to kind of deliver stories. Very often you find journalists standing with a mic and literally popping it into the face of somebody and saying, look, do you have anything to say? It's just not good enough. And so on both sides, I think the measurement needs to get rectified. And I think on the other side, the quality of people that are being hired and trained needs to be improved.
I think very interesting because you've broken down the entire concept of media in a very thoughtful process in terms of hiring, in terms of placing them, in terms of training. I think very well put across, and hopefully media houses take these things and change the way they are functioning. But like you again said on the flip side of the coin, that they have to look at the bottom lines, they have to look at the way the mainstream media is running today. So it is a kind of a mess, but that's how it is, fortunately or unfortunately. But putting a process is important, and if that's done, then probably half the things are solved.
Yeah, Nijesh, it's actually very easy for me and you and Natasha to sit here and kind of set the world to right, but in a conversation. But when you've got you're at the coalface, you're kind of dealing with things on a day-to-day basis. You're looking at your competitors and seeing what they're doing, and then you're looking at your advertisers and saying who's supporting them and who's not supporting us. Then I think the complexion and of that changes very quickly, because you have to really look at your kind of financials, and as somebody who runs a news channel has to do regularly, because that's what the shareholders are looking at and saying, what are you doing, and how's it going, and what's your numbers like. You need to have a kind of yardstick, and that yardstick, I think, needs to go back to the kind of industry forum that all these news channels belong to, and they need to kind of come together and say, look, if we carry on like this, we're doomed, right? Because we're not going to have whatever few viewers we have today, because they're all going to run off to social media and they're going to get what they want from there. They're not going to come to watch television. And what are we going to do with all these resources that we've invested in? So rather than that happen to us, why are we not looking at it from a different point of view and saying that, look, let us be qualitative in our analysis, and let us look at our news business and our product as something that people will value. I mean, I give you an example of a magazine. I call it a magazine, but they call themselves a newspaper. The Economist. Right now, The Economist is a great example. Right, they talk about news that's happened the week before, and they go into great detail. They are they believe in deadly accuracy. Right, they're precise. They're brilliantly written. And yet they are now migrating to an online space. They have, podcasts that people will watch and listen to for 3 minutes or 4 minutes at a time and stuff like that. Hasn't altered their basic core DNA. And I think that's what, a lot of our news products need to do in India, where we need to kind of look at ourselves and say, look, can we refine and reform before we get, swallowed up and just disappear? Because, that will happen if it's not rectified, I think.
That's actually true, sir. With the way things are going, what you're saying actually makes sense.
Well, if you look at Apple News and look at Google News and look at, some of these online products, they give you the news, they give you the headlines. If you want to go into detail, you can. It's, I think our news channel will struggle if they don't fix this problem. It's a basic thing to fix. It's not hard.
That's true, but I think let's just keep our fingers crossed and see how things go, because most of us are opting out. Yeah.
And it is about innovation, you got to consider it as an innovation opportunity. I mean, look at the Olympics. I mean, I saw the opening ceremony yesterday, and it was fantastic. Given all the constraints that were put in place, right? No, hardly any audience, etc., etc., etc. But Japan did a fantastic result. Fantastic job. It was all about innovation. How do you innovate when you're stuck with some serious constraints?
True. I think stagnancy is death, and innovation is the key. And well, I think conversations with like these can go on and on, because there's so much learning that happens, especially for me and Natasha, I'm sure. But every good thing has to come to an end, and we have to unfortunately pause with anticipation that sometime next we can get back Peter Mukerjea for a season 2. Talk about more of his book, and probably if there's a sequel to it, or something new that you write, we'll love to have you at our store physically, and have a book launch and have a reading session with live audience. So I think it's lovely, Peter, to have you today, and I'm sure that a lot of us who've been listening to you have gained so much in terms of the life skills that you have put in the book, and also of what you have spoken. So thank you so much, Peter, for this lovely session. And Natasha, unfortunately, time is a constraint, but that's how it is right now.
Peter, it was so good speaking to you today, and I must say, I really hope I meet you in person someday and we can continue this conversation, because there's so much to learn from you. And I'm really awaiting a book part 2, because I'm sure you have so much knowledge and so much experience that you can share with all of us.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you, both of you, for being so kind and generous with your words. I can't tell you how wonderful it makes me feel that you kind of feel a resonation to what I'm kind of trying to get across to you in our conversation this last 1 hour. It's flown by. I didn't realize it was an hour already. And thank you for the opportunity. And I look forward to joining you in person whenever I'm next in Bangalore. Maybe we have a cup of coffee and have a chat. And hopefully when my next book comes, we'll be in touch again. And I look forward to that very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And from all of us
so
at Sapna Book House, we wish you all the best for the book. And we really hope, it reaches so many people and it actually gives you that kind of recognition.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Desh, for this conversation. Thank you for being a part of it.
Thank you. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.